Welcome back to the second installment in the performance plan, following my progress, however you like to call it. But we're already at Deload week. You might be thinking, we've only had one episode of these videos so far, and you only talked about the first 2 weeks of training. Surely there's more training you have to do. You're right at the beginning of your plan. Why are you deloading so soon? It's not as simple as going through and deloading everything. I'm being a bit strategic about where I get my fatigue and also where I implement recovery across all of my training. So that's what we're going to talk about in this one. Bit of an update on this week. I'm going to show you a bit of my training as always at the beginning, and then we're going to jump across to training peaks and have a look. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Series. I haven't really worked out an official title for this yet, but hopefully you enjoyed the first one, getting an insight in terms of my thought process for my own training and how I implement some of the theory we talk about on this channel into practice. So we're back with another weekly update, and as you heard in the introduction, we're already at a deload week. Well, technically, I've got 2 deload weeks in a row, and there's good reason for it. But first, if you did want to get all of the extra stuff at the end of each month, going right into the data, make sure you do check out the join button down below. Join up to the channel membership. For less than a coffee a month, you're going to get access to some pretty cool and more detailed videos in terms of understanding how I go through and actually analyze a program on the back end, using training peaks, using the data that comes through, comparing sessions week to week and across a block, doing all the in-depth analysis I do with an athlete or a client of mine. I'm going to be doing myself and putting it up just for our members only. So if you are interested, consider clicking that join button down below. But otherwise, I appreciate a lot of support on the channel so far. Been really, really great. I'm looking forward to more videos in this current series. So like I said, it's kind of like having 2 deload weeks back to back. And you might actually be thinking, why are we already in a deload week? Given in the last video you talked about, you've only done 2 weeks of training, or you're in your 2nd week of training. So really this video, as I'm recording this, is actually the end of the 3rd week. I've got this weekend to finish out week 3. What's the point of having a deload week so early? And it's not as simple as deloading everything and deloading everything 2 weeks in a row. I've actually split things up. So what I've done is, if you think about my entire weekly structure as all of my strength and conditioning all combined, strength being my gym stuff, power, lifting weights, back squat, all of that stuff that we know in terms of we think of from a strength perspective, and then my conditioning being my running and my cycling that I've implemented into the program, which is basically the stuff that I need to do for my sport and for my performances. I need to be able to go out and run and high intensity, change direction, all of that. If we split those aside, what I've basically done is I've strategically worked into my overall program a way to manipulate load and manipulate fatigue, importantly, alongside the recovery component to make sure I'm not fluctuating with too much volatility, if you like. And what I mean is, this week is just a strength deload. I'm just deloading the stuff in the gym. And it's a really interesting thing I've played around before and I find works really well for me, is that I'm not dropping everything out this week. I'm just reducing the amount of volume, still maintaining some of the intensity, but something like that, instead of doing 3 sets of 6, I just did 2 sets of 6. And for doing some accessory exercise, instead of doing 3 sets, I dropped it down a couple of reps and only did 2 sets. These things reduced a bit of the loading in those sessions. Didn't necessarily take too much out of them, but just reduced it enough to just give me a little bit of additional time to recover and less stimulus on the body, and really focus on the conditioning part. So that's where I'm going to flip over to Training Peaks now. We'll have a quick look at how the week sort of looked this week, and I'll talk in a little bit more detail once we jump across. So what you can see here up on Training Peaks is this looks like a relatively normal training week. From the outset, you wouldn't actually know that I probably did anything different, to be honest. And that's kind of the point. The point of this is a strength-only deload. So I've left the note at the beginning of the week just as a reminder for myself that I'm just deloading strength. So really, I'm focusing on this strength A, strength B sessions in the week. What it has allowed me to do, and like I sort of alluded to just before, because I'm just reducing the strength stuff, it really allows me to emphasize the conditioning part, my running sessions and also my bike sessions, to maximize that. Because ultimately, that's the core of what I do. I need to be really aerobically fit. So I'm going to get most of my training benefit or performance side of things from these more sport-specific sessions, in terms, particularly the running, but also early stage conditioning plan from a preseason perspective. We talked about in the last one, the bike's going to be really important to top myself up and not have too much running load too early. Ultimately, what it means is I can really focus on, all right, what are my key sessions this week? Well, the big emphasis is on my running sessions, obviously, and nailing the intensity there, but also particularly in this bike interval session and in some of my zone 2, really nailing the conditioning, the volume's up, the intensity's up a bit as well, the stress on my body's up from a conditioning perspective. I don't want to overload it too much, which is just going to cause me to potentially just have some extra fatigue or extra DOMs in the legs, bit of soreness, and not be able to get up for the next day. Potentially as well, that's going to delay some of the recovery. So I want to make sure that this biggest week of the current block from a conditioning perspective can be done as effectively and as accurately as possible, because that's going to maximize the actual training adaptation I'm going to receive later down the track. What I'm then doing next week, if I scroll down, is you can see here conditioning deload. So this is actually week 4 of the program, and I've actually knocked down the amount of volume in some of these sessions. So you can see here only 20 or so minutes zone 2 bike. I've given myself a rest day. You can see 35-minute run as my longest running zone 2, only 2 runs in the week. All of that is just a bit of a deload of conditioning, still keeping the intensity in there, of course, but I'm just reducing the amount of volume to give my body a little bit of a break, given that we are the 4th week and the conditioning being the more emphasized part of the program. Well, that's where I'm going to have more of a longer period to build towards. But then what you can actually see here is that, well, this is where the strength stuff comes back. So I've actually implemented in the first block of training 2 strength sessions a week. Next block, from a strength perspective, I'm going to be implementing 3. So you can see I've got 3 sessions. The volume necessarily hasn't gone up super high because I'm implementing a 3rd session, which is kind of accommodating for extra volume and extra intensity there from a gym perspective. But you can clearly see that what I've done is I've been able to offset where I've deloaded my conditioning and strength. And really the point of offsetting conditioning and strength deloads is so that I'm not completely deloading everything at once and going build all the way up to a pretty high training load, and then having everything plummet all the way back down, and then the on week, when I come back to the next cycle, everything comes back up again. I don't want this volatile, really big dip in my deload. I want to try and have that a little bit smoother, particularly now in the preseason where I probably don't need as much recovery, maybe than down the track where the intervals aren't as hard just yet, and I'm not doing as much running, not as much really high speed, high load, change direction type of work as well. So it's a type of thing that offsetting this just allows me to emphasize those big weeks for each. So, I mean, it works the other way too. In a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to build up to my biggest strength week. What it allows me to do is go after the stuff in the gym a little bit more aggressively, because I know that the running is going to be pretty manageable and the conditioning side of things is going to be pretty manageable alongside it, because I'm not trying to do my big week in the gym and my big week out running and riding all in the one week. It's just offset a little bit so my body can handle it, a little bit more progressive. And as I mentioned, really, it's just strategic implementation of fatigue. Fatigue at the end of the day is just the response. Basically, the stimulus of the training session will induce a certain amount of fatigue. What we need to do is provide the adequate recovery to respond and adapt to the training. So I'm just trying to be really strategic about, do I want to accumulate even more fatigue in this week and then have a really big adaptation recovery week? Or do I want to be a bit more progressive with that and allow my body to, all right, be challenged a bit from a strength perspective, but still be able to be pretty solid and get some good stimulus running? Then the next week, I reduce the strength side of things, but I'm now challenged from a conditioning perspective. So it's just shifting a bit of the focus, and again, just periodizing really and being more strategic about where I'm getting some of that stimulus. So if that gives you a bit of an insight into this week. Not too much happened, nothing too exciting happened really this week, apart from the fact that Melbourne, we got out of our lockdown, so we can finally go out and do things a little bit more normally. So hopefully that also means a little bit more availability for me to go filming things, but it does mean that I will be heading back into work. So it'll be interesting to see how this plan progresses as I go back to work and start jumping in the lab and testing and having to shift around the timing of my sessions in the week. Just to make everything fit in. So stay tuned for that, because it's going to be really interesting how I handle that additional stressor apart from just physiological stuff in terms of the training. How do I handle some additional stress going on as well and the fatigue associated? But also, as I mentioned before, if you're interested in looking at the end of the month, it's coming up basically end of next week, actually, is the first video. I'm going to go and analyze this first block in depth. If you do want to check that out, make sure you click the join button down below, because as I said at the beginning, it's only going to be available to the members who sign up. Less than $1 a month, support the channel. It also helps me take some ads off some of these videos as well. So hopefully you enjoy a bit of the insights, and look forward to seeing you in some of those more in-depth analysis videos as well. So hopefully you enjoyed this little weekly update. A couple of things going on, a bit of an interesting take. Let me know your thoughts down below. As always, any questions you have about what I'm doing and why I've split up these deload weeks, leave them in the comments. Always happy to hear them and engage in some really good discussion with you guys as well. So I'm going to leave it there for today. Thanks for watching this one, and we'll see you in the next one.